Season number 2 is in the books for our Portland Trailblazers as it came to a screeching halt in the last episode with us getting swept out of the playoffs in the first round by the Houston Rockets. And today we've got a pretty busy episode. It's been a few days since the last episode of the series, and that's been because I've been working on some stuff behind the scenes that we're going to go over today. And I'm excited to talk about what's going to make this offseason a little bit different. So in the last episode, we went through games 3 and 4 against the Rockets. Game 3, we played horribly. We only lost by 11, but if you watch that game, it never really was close, and we just happened to have a big fourth quarter in garbage time. Game 4, we lost by 9, but this game was a lot more exciting. We struggled in the first half, but in that third quarter, something ignited our team on both ends of the floor, and we dominated, outscoring them 36-19. But then after that, we got outscored by over 20 points across the fourth quarter and overtime to lose the game, despite a game-tying 3 with seconds to go by Anthony Simons. So with that, our playoffs come to an end after just 4 games, and these are the stats across the first-round series against the Rockets. I wish that they counted the play-in stats as well for the playoffs, because I think that does count, but they don't because 2K is lazy, I guess. So real quick, we're going to go through the studs and duds of the playoffs. I didn't have a set vote for this, but I asked you guys last episode to comment some candidates who you thought would make sense. I'm going to name one stud of the playoffs and one dud of the playoffs. Our stud is obviously Shaedon Sharpe. There's no question here. Across the playoffs and the play-in tournament, he was incredible, scoring at least 24 points across all 6 games, shooting at least 50% from the field in 5 of those games, shooting at least 40% from 3 in 5 of those games, and he took over when needed. So because of him winning the stud of the playoffs, his rating and potential will go up by 1. As for our dud of the playoffs, I actually had a pretty hard time with this one. I don't think there's anybody who deserved it that much, but I'm going to give it to Ochai Agbaji. And yes, he did average a lot of points, and his numbers went up in comparison to the regular season. But his efficiency throughout the playoffs wasn't really very good. He did have some good performances. The play-in win against the Clippers, he was really impressive. But against the Rockets, I don't think he was very impactful, at least at a consistent level. In Game 3, he shot the ball well, but that's because he had like 15 points in the fourth quarter on 5 of 5 shooting. And that was the game where we scored 50 in the fourth quarter in garbage time. In Game 4, he had 20 points. And in that third quarter, he's the reason why we had the big rally, outscoring them by 17. He caught fire. But across the rest of the game, he wasn't very good. Actually, he was a liability, I should say. So his rating will go down by 1. 36% from the field across the 4 games against the Rockets. And that's with a couple of hot streaks in there. Still a great year, though, for Ochai, winning the stud of the year in the regular season. But I guess this is kind of a pump the brakes moment for him as he goes down by 1. We're going to simulate the rest of the playoffs first before we get to the surprise in today's episode. So we're going to go round by round, starting with simulating the first round, and we'll take a look at some of the movement across the league. We've had some pretty competitive series so far. Our series is the only one that ended in a sweep, and we've got some craziness here. Let's talk about it. So in the Eastern Conference, all 4 series went 7 games, with 3 lower-seeded teams winning, including the Knicks and the Hawks. Both of those teams finished under 500. They'll play each other in the second round. As for the other side, the Celtics will play against Cleveland, a little bit more standard. In the West, the 2 and 3 seeds lose as well. Dallas and Golden State knocked out by Minnesota and OKC, 2 teams who we were competing with throughout the year. So the 2 seeds are gone, the 3 seeds are gone. Which Cinderellas will make it to the conference finals? And again, very interesting second round. The Rockets get trampled, losing in 5 to Memphis, making our loss against the Rockets look pretty bad. We got swept by the same team who just lost in 5 games. The other series were pretty competitive. OKC beats Minnesota in 7. Cleveland needs 7 again to get by Boston. And then the Knicks get revenge on Trae Young, sweeping them. The Knicks won the finals last year, I think as a 6th seed, and here they are, back again, who only won 40 games in the regular season in the Eastern Conference Finals. So let's simulate through. and we will have a Grizzlies and Cavs final. I think the Knicks were up 3-1, and they blew it. So Cleveland wins another 7-game series, while the Grizzlies beat Oklahoma City in 5. And this gives us a really interesting finals matchup between the Grizzlies and the Cavs. I think the Grizzlies are pretty battle-tested. While Golden State and Dallas lost in the first round, the Grizzlies beat the Nuggets, they beat the Rockets, who are the two other best teams in the conference, and they also beat OKC, who's played really well. As for Cleveland, statistically, they're the best team in the NBA. They won the most games, they had the highest point differential, but the Eastern Conference is so much worse than the West, and Cleveland needed to go 7 games with the Nets, the Celtics, and the Knicks. All 3 of those teams did not finish over 500. So while Cleveland on paper might be a little bit better, and I think their roster is constructed better with 2 great guards, a good defensive front court, and shooters on the wings like Buddy Hield and Max Strus. So this roster is constructed very nicely, but I think the Grizzlies have actually shown me a lot more throughout the playoffs. They're going to have the best player on the floor in Ja Morant. They've got an even better defensive unit. Jaren Jackson, Nick Claxton, and Marcus Smart are all Defensive Player of the Year level defensive players. Desmond Bane and Tobias Harris are good role players as well. So I think Cleveland probably would be favored here, but I really like this matchup for the Memphis Grizzlies, and they would be my pick to win the finals, although I do think Cleveland's backcourt could cause the Grizzlies some fits as the Cavs win Game 1. They win by like 40-something in Game 2, 46 to be exact. Garland and Mitchell with 32. The Cavs win Game 3, so maybe I was wrong about Memphis. This series is looking like a blowout. The Grizzlies do get a win here in Game 4, so at least they're on the board. They win by 22. How about Game 5? Back and forth start, Cleveland with the edge. Grizzlies take it back, and Memphis wins another game. Okay, we've got ourselves a series going into a pivotal Game 6. Cleveland with a big first quarter. Memphis responds. Here in the fourth quarter, Cleveland seems to be in control, but Memphis brings it within 3. I feel like we've got to hop in. A minute and a half left in Game 6 of the finals as Jaren Jackson misses the corner 3 to tie it. Cleveland brings it up, looking to make it a 2-score game late. LeVert has Allen wide open, and Jared Allen throws it down. I'm not used to seeing Jared Allen in the finals. In the Knicks series, we had him for 2 championships, and he didn't play a single game in the finals. Brandon Clark with the turnaround jumper, 1-score game once again. Why the Grizzlies are having Brandon Clark shoot turnaround jumpers with a minute left, down by 3 in the finals, I don't know. Pick and roll for Allen once again. Cleveland leads by 5, and the Grizzlies are hoping for a miracle. Jackson posts up on Garland. That's a mismatch. He's got to get rid of that ball, and he does make it. Shot clock unplugged. There's only 17 seconds to go. As Donovan Mitchell gets the inbound, he would be fouled. While the following inbound, Darius Garland would be fouled as he sinks the first free throw and the second one to bring the lead up to 5 as he does the little shimmy shake. And it is good. Ice in his veins. 5-point lead for the Cavs. Can they hold on to finish? Harris out to Smart. Heaves up a prayer. No good. Rebounded by Mobley. He hands it off to Donovan Mitchell, and that should just about do it. The Cleveland Cavaliers win their 2nd NBA championship over the last decade. They won it all in 2016 with LeBron James, and they do it again 9 years later with an entirely different core of players. Cleveland is once again a city of champions. Why are they taunting Ja Morant? That's actually kind of hilarious. Ja Morant loses the finals. He's probably looking to get out of there, and Cleveland is not letting him. Shout out to the Cavs for making his life hell. Okay, why is he holding the trophy? I'm a little bit confused here. Didn't he just lose? So my hypothesis here would be that Ja Morant probably has some baggage with Adam Silver or the Cavs, and he really wanted to celebrate and hold the trophy. And Adam Silver knows that he probably has a weapon in his locker. So he knows that Ja Morant is the wrong guy to mess with. I still don't really get why Ja wants to hold the trophy. Maybe he thinks that he might not get another opportunity in the near future to hold the NBA trophy. So he figures, why not threaten the entire league with the loaded gun I probably have in my locker and get to hold it up with the Cavs? That would be my only guess. Other than that, I don't have a good explanation for you. The Finals MVP is not who you would expect. It ends up going to Evan Mobley, which is weird because his shooting efficiencies were pretty dreadful. I think the reason why they gave it to Mobley was his defense. Really good job as a shot blocker, a lot of steals. He also averaged close to 5 assists per game. I still feel like it should have been one of the guards. Garland and Mitchell were both great offensively in the finals, and while Mobley was the defensive anchor and he did a great job of that, his shooting splits were pretty rough, albeit he was guarded by Jaren Jackson and Nick Claxton, so I get it. So I mentioned in a prospect profile earlier in the season that I'm going to be doing things a little bit different over this offseason, and that I have a new formula for players' draft stocks moving up and down the board. Over the past few days, I've been working behind the scenes, and I have created a save file with all of the relevant colleges that the prospects in this year's draft are attending. I simulated a season within that save file, and players are going to move up and down the board based on their performance. Very similar to what I have with the Dragon Series with those players in NCAA 14. So what we're going to do today is recap the college basketball season, go over who won the championship, talk about some guys whose stocks have gone up, stocks have gone down, where all of the top prospects currently are, whereas next episode will be the draft preview itself. I will point out that I only focused on college basketball for this, so there are no international prospects, no players from the G League Ignite, nobody from Overtime Elite. I think going forward, starting next season, I will include everybody, and I'll make separate save files for the international guys and other players who are playing professionally. But since this is my first time doing something like this, I decided to keep it simple for myself. So we're only going over college players today, and I'm excited to dive into how this season went. With a brief recap of the NCAA tournament, Duke ended up beating Texas in the championship. That sounds like my worst nightmare. In the Final Four, we obviously had those two schools along with Arizona State and Michigan, with the regional MVPs being Troyland Battle, Amel Wright, TJ Porter Jr., and Dante Kingsley, with Amel Wright, the Duke freshman, winning the Final Four MVP, along with the MVP for the entirety of the tournament. This Duke team is especially interesting because they are very freshman-dominated, kind of similar to their 2019 team with Zion, RJ, Cam Reddish, although I would argue the freshmen on this team are probably less talented. But obviously they got the job done over a talented Texas team who should have multiple first-rounders. Let's start by assessing where a lot of the top prospects are, or at least the top prospects who played at the collegiate level. And right now I think we've got a two-way race for the number one pick between Myron Sheridan out of Michigan State and Troyland Battle out of Arizona State. These two players are very talented, but they had very differing seasons and come from differing situations. With Myron Sheridan, coming into the year, he was the consensus projected number one pick in the draft. And while there were some bumps in the road this year, I think overall he had a really good season. 16.3 points per game. He led Michigan State in rebounds. He led the entire Big Ten in assists, really showing that he's one of the best playmakers in this class. His scoring efficiency was a little bit spotty, but I think his free-throw percentage being really high suggests that he does have good shooting form and will be a good shooter down the line. As for Troyland Battle, I think he's a much less complete player than Myron Sheridan, and I think the ceiling with him is quite a bit lower, but he's a much better scorer. I think he's a little bit more consistent on both ends of the floor, and he was quite efficient this year, 47% from the field, 37% from three, and those are not empty stats. He was far and away the guy for an Arizona State team who ended up being a 3 seed and made the Final Four. So I think there is real reasoning to go with either one of these guys. As for some of the other players a little bit further down the board, I think Midnight Hopkins out of Houston had a great freshman year, averaging 19 and 8. I think he has cemented himself as a top 5 pick, possibly could go in the top 3. Amel Wright obviously had a great year as the Final Four MVP with Duke. Kalen Edwards is an interesting one because he showed a lot of flashes in the 11 games that he played with Clemson, but an ankle injury that he suffered in January sidelined him for the remainder of the year. It's probably not an injury that's going to affect him going forward, but that's a lot less film he has compared to some of these other prospects. I think of the top guys, Dante Branch was probably the most disappointing. He did have a great tournament run for Duke and was able to rebuild some stock. I think he is a gritty, hard-nosed winning player, good rebounder, good defender, but offensively he is super inconsistent. His efficiency throughout the year was very up and down, but when the lights were the brightest, he did deliver. As we look at some guys whose draft stocks have gone up throughout the year, obviously Troyland Battle is the name that headlines the list. Going into this season, he wasn't really on many scouts' radars to be a high NBA draft pick. But after the sophomore year he had at Arizona State, he's in the conversation to be the number one pick. Some other players here include Khalil Griffin out of Tennessee, who I think is one of my favorite players in the entire draft. You look at somebody who really impacts winning basketball. He averaged over 15.5 points per game, along with 8 rebounds. His shooting efficiency drastically improved throughout the year. He's a really solid defensive player. Tennessee mainly used him off the bench, although he was still second on the team in minutes played. And I think as the year went along, going into the tournament, he ended up being their most important player and led Tennessee to a nice Elite 8 run. TJ Porter Jr. and the Texas Longhorns beat Tennessee in the Elite 8. Texas was arguably the most consistent team in the country, especially over the last couple of months before losing in the national title. And I think TJ Porter Jr. is a big reason why. Look at the shooting splits, 46% from 3. Porter was also used primarily as a bench guy. He was their sixth man, and he was a spark plug for them offensively. And I think he has made himself a surefire first-rounder. Javon Tyler's a player we talked about, another guy who really impacts winning. He got hurt in February, and Kansas's season really was not the same. When he got injured, they were the second-ranked team in the country, and while they still ended up being a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, they lost in the second round, and I think their late-season collapse was because of Javon Tyler's injury. Some players here who we have not talked about throughout the year include some talented upperclassmen in the Big Ten. Ishmael Iverson Jr., the guard out of Penn State, is another guy who really impacts winning. He finished second behind Myron Sheridan for the Big Ten Player of the Year, all Big Ten first team, all NCAA second team. I think he's played himself into the first round. And then Santo Cortez out of Maryland, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. The efficiencies aren't great, but he's another guy who really impacts winning because of his ability on the defensive end of the floor. As for some players whose stocks have gone down, it feels weird to include 2 Duke players because they won the national title, but I think contrary to where they were at the beginning of the season, both Malachi Suleiman and Dante Branch have lost a little bit of their draft stock. Dante Branch in particular is interesting. We talked about him earlier because he's one of the better prospects in this draft class. And I think with the tournament run that he had, he has played himself back into the lottery. But I think some scouts aren't going to like his inconsistencies, whereas other scouts are going to see the skill set, they're going to look past the efficiency, and take a shot on him. As for Malachi Suleiman, he's another guy who was inconsistent throughout the year, played better in the tournament, led Duke in assists. The efficiency with him, though, was just not very good. Barely shooting over 40% from the field and 28% from 3. He's good at everything except for scoring the ball. He really cannot create his own shot, and that's a big deal. You need to be able to do that in the NBA. A common theme with players on this list is efficiency issues. Look at the bigs we have. JaKoi Toney out of Memphis. His efficiency was dreadful. Toney played really well through the first couple of months of the year, and then once we got into conference play, his performance took a nosedive, and offensively, he has got a long way to go. I will say I do think he still ends up in the first round because of his intriguing athletic profile. He's big, he's athletic, he's versatile, and I think defensively, he really profiles as your modern NBA forward who can bang down low with the big guys, but also with the quickness to switch onto the perimeter, and I think he's a pretty intriguing playmaker as well. So with Toney, you're drafting for upside, not so much the production offensively that he provided for Memphis. Adonis Cherokee out of Oregon's a talented player, another guy like Toney who was being looked at the lottery, but his offensive efficiency was shaky. Defensively, he wasn't all that impressive. He probably also still ends up in the first round based on athletic tools and long-term offensive upside because I think he's got a pretty good jump shot, but he was a little bit disappointing this year with the Ducks. Some guys we did not talk about include Reggie Coffey out of Kentucky. Talented player, but the efficiency across the board was not good. And the same can be said for Peyton Profit out of Syracuse. I think Coffey probably falls to the second round. I think Profit still ends up in the first round because, again, he's got a really intriguing athletic profile, and I think teams believe that he will be a better pro player than he was in college. And because of that, I think he probably still ends up as a first rounder. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little segment here of recapping the college basketball season. Let me know what you thought of it down below in the comments. I'm definitely going to improve since, again, this was my first time doing something like this, and I've got some ideas, and I want to hear your guys' feedback as well. Next episode, we'll go through the start of the offseason. We will have our regular pre-draft preview, although a lot of players' stocks will have changed, and I'll be able to throw out stats and other stuff like that to add context to these prospects that we haven't really had in my series prior. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.